Nadia stood in the parking lot of the building her family had used for 12 years and realized she was the only one whose name was not on the sign. She had paid the first 3 months of rent from her own savings. She had negotiated the lease when her uncle said it was too complicated for a young woman to handle. She had stayed up 2 nights in a row getting the numbers right so the business would not fail in its first season. And when the grand reopening banner went up with her uncle's name, her aunt's name, and her cousin Marcus's name across the top, Nadia pressed her car keys into her palm until it left a mark, breathed slowly, and said nothing. That was the beginning of something that nobody in that family saw coming. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something honest. If you had given years of your time, your money, and your silence to people who kept taking credit for everything you built, at what point would you have stopped? At what point would you have said, this is not loyalty anymore, this is just loss? Drop your answer in the comments. Because what Nadia did next surprised even the people who thought they knew her best. Nadia was 31 years old when the story that mattered most began to move. She had been working inside her family's business since she was 19, not playing at it, not helping out on weekends. Working. Full days, long weeks, the kind of work that comes without a title and often without a paycheck that matched what the work was worth. Her uncle Darren had started the business, a mid-sized event supply company that rented chairs, tables, linens, lighting rigs, and decorative structures to venues across 3 counties. It was not glamorous, but it was steady and it had potential that most of the family could not see, and Nadia could see clearly from the first year she walked in. She had come in as a favor, that was the story her family told. Uncle Darren needed help with the books because his original accountant had walked out after a billing dispute. Nadia had just finished 2 years of business management courses and was working part-time at a logistics company. Darren called her mother called her. Nadia said she would help for 2 months. 2 months became 2 years, 2 years became 11. And somewhere in that time, the business stopped being a struggling rental operation with 3 vans and a rented storage unit, and became a company with 12 employees, 2 warehouses, a delivery fleet, and a reputation across the region that people actually called about before deciding where to book. Nadia did not do all of that alone, she would be the first to say it. Darren had the name in the community, her Aunt Priscilla ran the front desk and handled client relationships in a way that people liked. Her cousin Marcus, who was Darren and Priscilla's son, drove deliveries for years and later moved into operations. The family showed up, Nadia would give them that, but there was a difference between showing up and building. And what Nadia built quietly and consistently was the system that kept everything from falling apart. She was the one who created the pricing structure that finally made the business profitable. She was the one who caught a supplier double charging them for 2.5 years before anyone else noticed. She was the one who found the second warehouse when they outgrew the first and negotiated a lease that saved the business $40,000 over the life of the contract. She was the one who hired the bookkeeper, trained the delivery coordinator, and set up the digital inventory system that cut their lost item claims down by more than 60%. Every time there was a problem that required someone to sit down and figure it out, Nadia was the person who sat down. She told herself this was what family meant. She told herself that her reward was not a title or a public mention. Her reward was watching something she helped build continue to survive and grow. She told herself that patient people get their recognition eventually. She was wrong about some of that, but it took her a long time to understand which parts she was wrong about. The first sign that something was deeply off came 5 years into her role when Darren brought in a business consultant from outside the family. The consultant spent 4 days reviewing the operation. On the last day, he gave a presentation to Darren and Priscilla in the main office. Nadia was not invited into the room. She sat at her desk in the open area outside and processed purchase orders. 2 hours later, Darren came out and told her the consultant had said the business needed a dedicated operations director and a financial manager. Darren said he was thinking about bringing Marcus into an elevated leadership role. He asked Nadia if she would be comfortable training Marcus on the financial side of things. Nadia remembers looking at Darren for a long moment before answering. She asked in a careful and steady voice what her own role would be called going forward. Darren smiled at her the way people smile at someone they expect to be reasonable. He said she was family. He said family did not need titles. He said the business would always take care of her. Nadia nodded. She said she would be happy to help Marcus get oriented. And she went home that evening and sat at her kitchen table for almost an hour before she could make herself move. She did not quit, she did not make a scene, she adjusted. She showed Marcus everything she knew patiently and completely, which later became one of those decisions she replayed many times. She answered his questions even when they were questions about systems she had personally built from nothing. She covered his gaps without pointing at them. She told herself she was being generous and that generosity was its own reward. Meanwhile, Marcus was introduced to vendors as the operations director. His business card said operations director. His name appeared on contracts. When clients asked who ran the floor, Marcus answered and nobody corrected the framing. Nadia's name appeared nowhere that mattered. When the Regional Business Association profiled the company in their newsletter, the article mentioned Darren as founder, Priscilla as the heart of client relations, and Marcus as the driving force behind their operational growth. Nadia was referenced in one sentence as a long-term team member who supported financial functions. She had been there longer than Marcus. She had built more than Marcus. She was called a team member in a newsletter while Marcus was called a driving force. She printed that article. She kept it in a drawer in her apartment. She did not know yet why she kept it. She found out later. The years continued. The business grew. Nadia's contributions continued to be invisible in every public way that mattered. She did not stop working hard, that was not who she was. But she started paying closer attention to what was happening around her. She started noticing the patterns she had been too busy to see clearly before. She noticed that when clients sent thank you cards, they went to Priscilla's desk and Priscilla put them in a binder she kept visible in the lobby. She noticed that when problems came up, Darren came to her desk quietly and they fixed the problem together. But when the problem was solved and reported to clients or vendors, Darren said we figured it out without naming who the we actually was. She noticed that her salary had not changed meaningfully in 4 years, even though the business revenue had more than doubled in the same period. She noticed that her cousin Marcus had received 2 salary increases in 3 years and had just leased a new truck. She started keeping records, not out of anger, out of something quieter and more careful than anger. She started writing things down in a notebook she kept in her bag, dates, conversations, decisions, amounts. She did not know yet what she would do with any of it. She just knew that when you're the person who keeps everything from falling apart and nobody is keeping track of that for you, you have to keep track for yourself. The second sign came 8 years in when Darren had a health scare. It was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough that he needed to step back from daily operations for about 6 weeks. He called Nadia at home the evening before his procedure and asked her to hold things together while he recovered. He did not call Marcus. He did not call Priscilla. He called Nadia. She said yes without hesitation. For 6 weeks, she ran the entire operation, managed client communications, handled a vendor dispute that had been simmering for months, and covered 3 major events without a single visible failure. When Darren came back, he thanked her warmly and personally. He told her she had done a remarkable job. He told her the business would not have survived 6 weeks without her. He brought her a gift. It was a thank you card and a flower arrangement. Marcus received a bonus that quarter for his contributions to operational stability during a challenging period. Nadia is not a person who performs her emotions, but she remembers sitting in her car after reading about Marcus's bonus in the internal memo that Priscilla accidentally forwarded to the whole team. She sat in her car for 20 minutes. She thought about her father, who had told her years ago that hard work speaks for itself. She thought about her mother, who had encouraged her to be patient with family because family was different. She thought about the flower arrangement sitting on her desk, already starting to droop at the edges. And she thought, with a clarity she had never quite felt before, that she had confused loyalty with invisibility. She had thought staying quiet was a form of grace. She was beginning to understand that it had just been a form of loss. She did not explode, she did not confront anyone, she did something more useful. She started thinking carefully about her future. She started asking questions she should have asked years earlier to herself in the quiet of her apartment with the notebook open and the pen in her hand. What do I actually own here? What is my name attached to? What could I walk away with if I needed to walk away? And the answers to those questions, once she was honest about them, were harder to sit with than she expected. The answer was almost nothing. She had no ownership stake in the business. She had no formal contract beyond a basic employment agreement that named her as an administrative and financial coordinator. She had no intellectual property claim on any of the systems she had built because she had built them during her employment without a clear written understanding that those systems were hers. She had poured 11 years of her thinking into a company that, on paper, belonged entirely to someone else. She had been so focused on the work that she had never protected herself inside the work. She thought about that for a long time, and then instead of feeling defeated, she felt something else, decided. She was going to change the conditions of her life carefully and deliberately without burning anything down before she was ready. She started putting a plan together. The plan was not dramatic. It did not involve sabotage, theft, exposure, or confrontation for its own sake. It involved one thing: building something of her own. She had learned everything she needed to know about running a service business. She had contacts across 3 counties. She had relationships with vendors that the business depended on partly because she was the one who had built them. She had skills, experience, and a reputation among the people who actually worked in the industry, even if that reputation had never been allowed to be public. She was going to use all of it. She spent 3 months doing this quietly. She registered a business in her own name. She spent evenings researching the gaps in the local market that she had noticed during her years managing the event supply operation. She reached out carefully and professionally to 2 vendors she had personal relationships with, not to poach business, but to begin building supplier relationships for her own future company. She opened a separate business account. She took one small private event booking from a client who had specifically requested her by name after they found her through a mutual contact. She handled it perfectly. She said nothing to anyone in her family. She was not stealing from the company. She was building beside it quietly on her own time with her own resources. She was doing what any reasonable person would do when they finally understood that the house they had been maintaining for years was never going to have their name on the deed. The turn in the story did not come from Nadia making a dramatic move. It came from outside. In the 10th month of her quiet planning, Darren received a significant offer. A regional events management group, a much larger company that had been expanding through acquisitions, made a formal offer to buy the business. The offer was substantial. Nadia heard about it through Priscilla, who mentioned it at a family dinner that Nadia attended out of habit. Priscilla was glowing. She talked about what they could do with the money. She talked about retiring. She talked about Marcus finally being able to buy the house he had been looking at. She talked about all of the family members who would share in the windfall from the sale. Nadia asked in a calm and curious voice what the sale offer was based on. Priscilla said it was based on the company's revenue, its client base, its operational systems, and its growth trajectory over the past 4 years. Nadia nodded slowly. She excused herself to use the restroom. She sat in Priscilla's guest bathroom with the door closed and the fan running and felt the full weight of what she was understanding. The systems that had made this sale possible were systems she had created. The operational efficiency that had driven the revenue growth was efficiency she had built. The client retention record that the acquiring company found attractive was a record she had shaped through her work. And she was going to receive nothing from the sale except, possibly, a continued employment offer from new ownership if they decided to keep staff. She came back to the table, she ate the rest of her dinner, she said goodnight to everyone warmly, she drove home, she opened her notebook, and she started writing. The next morning, she called an attorney, not to threaten anyone, not to make accusations. She called to understand clearly what her legal position was, what documentation she had, and what options she might realistically have before a sale of that scale was finalized. The attorney listened carefully. He asked her to bring in everything she had. She brought in 11 years of documentation, emails she had saved, internal memos she had written, financial analyses with her name in the metadata, system design documents she had created, the client database structure she had built, time-stamped in the company's own software logs, project completion records. Her original employment agreement, which turned out to be more useful than she expected because it had never been formally updated and still described her role in language that, combined with the actual scope of what she had done, created a meaningful gap between her agreed compensation and the value she had contributed. The attorney told her she had a case, not a guaranteed win, not a dramatic courtroom moment, but a legitimate and documentable claim that warranted serious consideration before any sale moved forward. He advised her to send a formal notice to Darren and his legal team before the acquisition closed. The notice would outline her contributions, her documentation, and her expectation of fair compensation as part of the sale transaction. Nadia sat with this for 4 days before she agreed to move forward. She was not doing it out of spite. She was not doing it to hurt Darren, who she genuinely cared about in some complicated way. She was doing it because she had finally understood that protecting herself was not the same as betraying someone else. She had confused those two things for 11 years. She was done confusing them. The notice went out on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Darren had called her 3 times. She did not answer. By Wednesday morning, he had left 2 voicemails. The first one was calm and confused. The second one was hurt and a little angry. He said he did not understand why she was doing this. He said they were family. He said the business had always taken care of her. He said she was going to complicate something that was good for everyone. Nadia listened to both voicemails twice. She saved them. She sent her attorney a note saying she was ready to move forward with a formal meeting. The meeting happened 10 days later. Darren brought Priscilla and Marcus. Nadia brought her attorney and a folder that contained a document index of everything she had submitted. The attorney had prepared a clear and organized presentation of Nadia's contributions, the documented evidence behind each claim, and a specific compensation figure that they were requesting as part of any sale transaction. It was not an astronomical number. It was a number that her attorney had calculated based on the industry standard for the value contributed by a senior operational and financial architect over a comparable time period. It was a fair number. It was also a number that nobody in that room had ever said out loud when thinking about Nadia. Darren looked at the documents. He looked at Nadia. He said very quietly that he had not realized. Nadia met his eyes and said nothing. She let her attorney continue the presentation. Priscilla was less quiet. She said that Nadia had always been treated like family, that she had been compensated, that nobody had forced her to stay, that she could have left at any time if she was unhappy. Nadia's attorney responded to each of those points with documentation. When Priscilla said Nadia had been compensated fairly, the attorney showed the salary history alongside the revenue growth curve. When Priscilla said nobody had forced Nadia to stay, the attorney asked what an employee is supposed to do when she has invested years of her professional life and has been given no written indication that her contributions are undervalued. When Priscilla said Nadia could have raised these concerns at any time, The attorney pointed to the email Nadia had sent 4 years ago asking for a formal role review, which had received no written response. Marcus said nothing through most of the meeting. Near the end, he looked at Nadia and said in a voice that was somewhere between confused and defensive that he had worked hard too. Nadia looked at him and said she knew that. She said she had never questioned Marcus's effort. She said this was not about Marcus. She said this was about what was documented, what was fair, and what she deserved as someone whose work had materially contributed to the value that was now about to be sold. Then she stopped talking. She let the room be quiet. The meeting ended without a resolution that day, but both attorneys stayed in contact. 3 weeks later, Darren's attorney made a counterproposal. It was lower than Nadia's initial figure. Nadia's attorney went back with a revised number. There were 2 more rounds of communication. In the end, they reached an agreement. The number was not everything Nadia had asked for, but it was significant, it was real, it was documented, it was hers. She signed the agreement on a Thursday in October. Her attorney shook her hand. She drove home. She sat in her apartment. She did not feel triumphant in the way she had imagined. She felt something cute, younger and more solid. She felt like a person who had finally told the truth on her own behalf and had not apologized for doing it. The family's reaction unfolded over the weeks after the agreement was signed. Darren did not reach out immediately. Priscilla called Nadia's mother and told her that Nadia had blindsided the family and threatened the sale for her own gain. Nadia's mother called Nadia the next day, upset. Nadia sat on her couch and listened to her mother's distress without interrupting. When her mother finished, Nadia explained calmly and clearly what had happened. She did not perform her emotions. She did not exaggerate, she simply described what was in the documents, what the attorney had outlined, and what she had agreed to. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she had not known about the email that went unanswered, she had not known about the salary disparity, she had not known about the newsletter, she said she needed some time to think. Nadia said that was fine. A few days later, Nadia's mother called back. She said she had spoken to her sister Priscilla and had asked some direct questions. She said she was sorry, not for encouraging Nadia to be patient because she genuinely believed patience was a virtue, but she was sorry for not asking better questions earlier. She said she did not fully understand what Nadia had been carrying. Nadia thanked her, she meant it. Marcus came to see her about 2 weeks after the agreement. He came to her apartment. He rang the doorbell, she let him in. He sat across from her at her kitchen table and looked at his hands for a while before he spoke. He said he had looked at the documents his father had shared after everything was settled. He said he had not realized the inventory system was something Nadia had built from scratch. He had always assumed it came with the software. He said he had not realized how long her salary had stayed flat. He said he was not sure what he was supposed to say. Nadia told him he did not have to say anything complicated. She said she had no interest in making him feel guilty. She said what she had done was for herself, not against him. He nodded. He said he thought he understood. He asked if they were okay. She thought about that for a moment. She said they were getting there. She did not forgive everything instantly. She was not that kind of person, and this story was not that kind of story. Forgiveness, when it came slowly and honestly because Nadia had learned that forgiveness handed out too quickly was just another way of going silent. In the months after the settlement, while the acquisition was being finalized, Nadia kept building her own company. The settlement gave her capital she had not expected to have this soon. She invested it carefully. She leased a small storage space. She bought her first equipment lot. She hired 1 part-time assistant. She accepted 3 private event bookings from clients who had found her by word of mouth, all of whom she served with the same precision and care she had always brought to her work. She did not advertise aggressively. She did not make a public announcement designed to embarrass the family business. She built quietly the way she had always built, except this time her name was on everything. She named the company simply and directly. She used her own last name. She had always liked the idea of a name that did not need explanation, that stood on its own. When she ordered her first set of business cards, she sat at her desk looking at them for a long moment before putting them in a card holder. Her name, her title, her company, her number, nobody's permission required. The acquiring company completed their purchase of Darren's business 4 months after Nadia's settlement was signed. Several of the vendors Nadia had personal relationships with reached out to her during the transition period. 2 of them told her they were uncertain about how things would work under new ownership and asked if she was still in the industry. She told them she was. She told them she had started her own operation. Both vendors asked for her new business information. She gave it to them. The client relationship manager from the acquiring company contacted her 3 months after the sale was complete. She said the new ownership was impressed by certain operational documentation in the company's files and had traced several of the key systems back to Nadia's authorship. She said they would be interested in having Nadia come in as a consultant to help their team understand the systems more deeply. She named a consulting rate. It was the highest rate Nadia had ever been offered. Nadia thanked her for the call. She said she would need to check her schedule as she was running a growing operation of her own. She said she would follow up within 2 weeks. She kept that deadline. She followed up. She negotiated the consulting terms. She accepted the engagement on her own conditions. Air was something almost perfectly circular about walking back into that building as a paid consultant with her own contract and her own rate. She noted it without dwelling on it too long. She was not someone who needed poetry from her circumstances. She needed clarity, and clarity was what she had. Darren reached out personally about 6 months after the sale was complete. He asked if he could take her to lunch. She agreed. They sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant near the old office. He ordered coffee, she ordered tea. He spent a few minutes talking about his retirement plans, about Priscilla's garden, about Marcus settling into his new role. Then he became quiet. He looked at his cup. He said he owed her more than an apology, but he was going to start with one. He said he had thought about it a great deal. He said he had always believed he was being fair to her because he felt warmly toward her and because she had never complained loudly enough for him to hear. He said he now understood that warmth and fairness were not the same thing. He said the newsletter had bothered him when he saw her bring it up in the documents. He said he had not written it, but he had read it and had not thought to correct it. He said he was sorry for that specific moment and for the pattern it represented. Nadia listened to all of this. She did not cry, she did not reassure him, she let him finish. Then she said she appreciated that he was saying it, she said she believed he meant it. She said she also needed him to understand that her decision to protect herself legally had come from exhaustion, not anger. She said she had not been planning a trap. She had been a person who finally understood that nobody else was going to protect her place in her own story. He nodded, he said he understood. She said she hoped so. They finished their lunch. They parted cordially. She does not see Darren often now, but when she does, there is something more honest between them than there ever was when she was staying quiet on his behalf. In the second year of running her own company, Nadia won her first industry recognition. A regional business association, the same organization whose newsletter had once described her as a long-term team member who supported financial functions, featured her in their annual spotlight issue. The headline described her as a first-generation business owner whose precision and client focus were reshaping service standards in the event supply industry. Her photo was on the front of the issue. Her full name was in the headline. She did not frame the issue because she was not someone who needed trophies, but she kept two copies. She put one in her desk drawer beside the old newsletter. She kept the other one in a folder with the original settlement documents, not out of vindictiveness, but because she believed that memory had value. That knowing where you came from helped you understand where you were going. She thought on the day she first saw that spotlight issue about the parking lot where the story had started for her in the most conscious way, the banner with the names on it, the car keys pressed into her palm, the quiet she had offered to people who read it as permission. She thought about how long she had confused giving with losing. How long she had believed that if she just worked hard enough and waited long enough, fairness would arrive on its own without her having to name it or ask for it or sometimes even fight for it. She thought about the flower arrangement and the bonus Marcus received in the same season. She thought about the voicemails from Darren. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, full of conflict and love in equal measure. She thought about the notebook. She had filled 4 of them by the time she sat looking at that spotlight issue. 4 notebooks of dates, conversations, amounts, decisions, and moments she had needed to witness for herself because nobody else was going to witness them for her. She had not set out to build a case. She had set out to keep a record of her own life. The case had come later because she had been paying attention when it mattered. She thought about the difference between bitterness and clarity. Bitterness turns inward, clarity turns outward. She had spent a long time carrying something heavy and calling it loyalty. Clarity had come when she finally set it down. Her company continued to grow through the second year and into the third. She hired 2 full-time staff members. She expanded her equipment inventory. She took on her first large-scale corporate event booking. She handled it the same way she handled everything, methodically, personally, with attention to the details that most people in the industry glossed over. The client gave her a written testimonial at the end of the event. She used it in her company materials. Her name was on it. Her company was named in it. Nobody else took the credit. She had not become a different person, THR. Any of this, that was the thing she wanted to be honest about when she reflected on it. She had not transformed into someone harder or colder or more calculating. She was still the same woman who paid careful attention to the people around her, who worked thoughtfully, who did not make noise for its own sake, who cared about doing things right. The difference was that she now cared about doing things right for herself with the same consistency she had always cared about doing things right for other people. She had simply extended her own standards of fairness to include herself. It sounded simple when she said it that way. It had not felt simple while she was learning it, but on the other side of it, it was one of the truest things she knew. There is a particular kind of courage in doing the right quiet thing for yourself in a world that keeps praising you for doing the loud generous thing for other people. Nadia had found that courage. She held it steadily. She did not wave it around. She just used it consistently every day in small and large decisions. She used it when a new vendor tried to short her on a delivery and she corrected it calmly and in writing. She used it when a client asked for something outside the contract scope and she responded clearly about what was included and what would require an additional agreement. She used it when a family member, not her closest, someone further out, reached out asking for help with an event and expected her to offer a family discount without asking. She was kind in her response. She was also clear. She said her company operated on standard rates and she would be happy to send an invoice. She did not feel guilty about any of these moments. That was perhaps the clearest sign of how much had changed. There had been a time when every clear-eyed, fair-minded decision she made for herself had arrived wrapped in guilt. The guilt had been trained into her by years of being praised most when she gave the most and asked for the least. She had learned to associate her own needs with a kind of selfishness that polite and loyal women were not supposed to demonstrate. She was done with that framing. She was not selfish for knowing her own worth. She was not disloyal for protecting it. She was not a bad person for being done being invisible. The fourth year of her company, she expanded into a neighboring county. The expansion required a second lease negotiation, a new staffing structure, and a marketing effort aimed at building her name in a market where she was not yet known. She handled all three of those challenges with the same methodical care she brought to everything. The expansion took longer than she had originally projected. There were 2 months where she wondered if she had moved too fast. She went back to basics. She reviewed her finances. She tightened her projections. She made 2 adjustments to her service model. By the end of the year, the second location was holding steady, and by the following spring, it was profitable. She did not celebrate by making noise. She noted the milestone in her notebook. She took a weekend off and drove to a lake house she had rented with money she had earned entirely on her own. She sat on the dock on the first morning and watched the water. She thought about all the early mornings she had driven to the old warehouse before anyone else arrived, made the coffee, turned on the lights, and started the day for a company she did not own. She thought about the energy she had given and the silence she had received in return. She thought about what it had cost her and also, honestly, what it had taught her. She thought about what the attorney had said when they first met, which was that the documentation she had saved was the most organized he had seen from a non-legal professional. She thought about her father's words about hard work, and she thought that he had not been wrong exactly, just incomplete. Hard work speaks for itself only if there is someone in the room listening for your voice. She had learned to be that someone. She had learned to listen for herself. That was the deepest lesson, and she had earned it the hard way, which is usually the only way lessons that matter actually land. There were still hard days. There were still moments when she sat with old feelings that had not fully finished moving through her. There were still family gatherings where the history of what had happened sat in the room with everyone and nobody quite knew how to arrange themselves around it. There were still conversations with her mother that required patience. There were still moments when she heard Priscilla's name and felt something tighten in her chest before she breathed through it. She did not pretend otherwise. She was not a person who rewrote her own history to make the healing seem easier than it was. But she was also someone who could look at her company's name on a contract and feel something clean and solid and fully her own. She was someone who could shake a vendor's hand and know that the relationship was hers, not borrowed from someone else's goodwill. She was someone who woke up on Monday mornings without dread, which she had not been able to say for most of the years she had spent keeping the quiet peace in someone else's house. She thought sometimes about what she would say if someone young came to her and described a situation similar to the one she had lived through. Someone who was doing the most important work in a family operation and receiving the least recognition. Someone who had told herself that loyalty was its own reward for so long that she had almost believed it. Someone who was still waiting for fairness to arrive without her asking for it. She thought she would tell that person a few things. She would tell them to document everything, not from paranoia but from self-respect, because your memory of what you did belongs to you and it is worth protecting. She would tell them that staying quiet can feel like grace from the inside, but it often looks like permission from the outside, and those two things are not the same. She would tell them that being generous with your work does not obligate others to be generous in return, and waiting for that obligation to feel real will cost you years. She would tell them that protecting yourself legally and financially is not a betrayal of love, it is a form of self-love that love alone will not always provide. She would tell them that the moment you decide you matter as much as the people you have been serving is not a selfish moment. It is a survival moment. And survival is worth taking seriously. Most of all, she would tell them that the person who saw everything you did and kept no record of it was not your enemy. They were just someone who benefited from your visibility not being their problem. Making your contributions visible, making them documented and known and protected was always your job. The sooner you start, the less you lose. Nadia is 38 now. Her company is 7 years old. She has 11 employees. She has a reputation in the industry that she built herself with her own name on it in her own time. She has a relationship with her family that is honest if not always easy. She has a life that belongs to her in the full and complete way that she had been giving away to others for years without realizing the cost. She keeps the notebooks, all of them, not as wounds, as records, because she learned that the story of how she got here was worth keeping, that her version of what happened was worth holding onto, that she had been the one who showed up and stayed and built and adapted and held on quietly for far too long, and that all of that was part of who she was, not a chapter she needed to be ashamed of. She had been the one who finally said enough, not with a shout, with a signature, with a notebook full of dates, with a calm voice in a conference room, with a company registered in her own name on a Tuesday morning when nobody was watching. That was the kind of enough that lasted. Nadia did not get here by becoming someone harder. She got here by becoming someone more honest, with herself first and with everyone else second. I want to ask you something before you go. Think about the spaces in your own life where you have been the person doing the most while your name appears the least. Have you ever stayed quiet about something you built because you did not want to seem difficult? Have you ever confused staying loyal with staying invisible? Leave your answer in the comments below. This story is not just Nadia's. It belongs to everyone who has ever done the most important work in a room and been thanked with a flower arrangement. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if this channel has ever felt like a voice that speaks your story back to you, stay with us. Nadia's journey is not finished, it is only getting clearer.